This is a seemingly regular photograph of Earth from space. It looks ordinary until you look more closely and notice this, a strange black object of a weird shape. What the... Well, okay, maybe that's just a Photoshop image. Someone superimposed a deliberately incomprehensible object onto the photo so that it wouldn't be too obvious that it was forged. No, this picture is in NASA's official archive. It's definitely not faked. Yes, the photo is real, but the properties attributed to the object in this photo. Actually, this particular frame you would encounter less frequently on the internet. Those familiar with the story have probably seen this picture, and usually only 1 or 2 frames are shown. But I found possibly all 6 existing frames in the archive. And perhaps one of the most far-fetched conspiracy theories is associated with the object in the pictures. Conspiracists call the object the Black Knight and believe it to be a spacecraft of extraterrestrial origin. How do you like, for example, this headline? Alien satellite set up 12,000 years ago to spy on humans is shot down by the Illuminati, claim conspiracy theorists. I don't even know where to begin. This story is indeed very strange. It spans events that take place over more than 100 years. It involves Nikola Tesla, ufologists, science fiction writers, the CIA and spy satellites, the ISS, and even somehow the ancient Maya got mixed in. Well, it is super weird, but also very interesting. So let's for a change talk not about cosmology or quantum mechanics. Let's have some fun and talk about some crazy conspiracy theories. And as always, I try not only to debunk sometimes very obvious false claims, but at the same time use this as a reason to talk about some interesting cosmic phenomena and technologies related to this story. My name is Andrei, and this is Cosmos Elementary. This story is special in a way. After all, we've seen many strange objects in photographs. On Mars they see humanoid figures, frogs, doors, but of course it's all just a play of light and shadow and a variety of shapes in the Martian terrain. Moreover, poor quality of the footage often contributes to the play of light and shadow. Just like the famous face on Mars, which was rephotographed later in higher resolution, and obviously there is no face on Mars. But here the story is different. Firstly, clearly there is an object present in the photo, and there are multiple photographs of the same object. And if, for example, with a humanoid on Mars, photographs are all we have, those who claim that the Black Knight exists bring forth far more than just photographs as evidence. They provide a whole story, a whole bunch of seemingly independent testimonies and evidence. The main idea of this conspiracy theory in its modern form is that there is a satellite of extraterrestrial origin in orbit around Earth, specifically in a polar orbit, placed there by aliens 12,000 years ago to spy on humans on Earth. And they supposedly came from the Izar system, a triple star system located about 200 light years away from us. Allegedly, NASA knows about this but keeps it hidden from us. The object is called the Black Knight, and supposedly it was accidentally photographed during the STS-88 mission in 1998. During that mission, Unity module was docked to Zarya module, which was already in space at that time. These photographs were taken by the cosmonaut Sergei Krikalev. The photos, along with other shots from that mission, were published, but allegedly, after people found a strange object in them, they were deleted from NASA's website. The pictures from 1998 are just the most recent so-called evidence. So first let's go briefly over other evidence and then we can delve into each one more thoroughly. All this evidence that supposedly confirmed the existence of an extraterrestrial object in orbit around Earth. By the way, when I say the dumbest theory, I don't mean the absurdity of the main idea. There are of course much more radical ideas. From different theories about the shape of the Earth, flat or concave, to ideas that there are no trees on Earth. Tabletop mountains are the stumps of ancient giant trees and modern trees are just shrubs. Or something along those lines. Here I'm more talking about how unrelated stories are put together after the fact as evidence for one theory. The first to get involved, or rather chronologically speaking, as evidence they use none other than Nikola Tesla himself. Supposedly during his experiments in 1899 he recorded strange signals that seemed artificial, and he concluded that they were from aliens, so modern conspiracy theorists attribute them to the Black Knight. In the 1920s, Norwegian engineer Jørgen Holst recorded strange signals which we now know as long-delayed echoes, LDEs. The peculiarity of those echoes is that after a signal is sent from Earth, its echo returns with a delay, which can last from several seconds to 40 seconds. Interestingly, this phenomenon still lacks definitive explanation, though there are some plausible theories. But one of the alternatives is that returning signals aren't just echoes, but signals sent by aliens. In 1954, two American newspapers reported on two satellites in Earth's orbit, allegedly even confirmed by the US Air Force. Notice anything suspicious? Well, yeah. The first artificial satellite was launched by the Soviet Union only in 1957. What other satellites were there in 1954? Alien satellites, of course. Later, when artificial satellites were already in orbit, sent both by Soviets and the US, in 1960, newspapers began reporting on a strange dark object supposedly detected by radar. An interesting detail is that the alleged object had a polar orbit. More precisely, it was reported that the inclination of the orbit was not 90 degrees but 79, which is close enough. Neither side admitted that it was their satellite. Well, that means it's definitely aliens, and since the object was dark, it's definitely the Black Knight. In 1973, an article by Duncan Lunan was published in the journal Spaceflight of the British Interplanetary Society. I should mention that this journal is not peer-reviewed, meaning it's not academic, and it doesn't publish actual scientific papers. So Lunan decided to conduct a reanalysis of the long-delayed echoes captured by Jørgen Holst in 1920s. He concluded that the transmitted signals were a star map pointing to the Izar or a Epsilon Boötes system. An alien spaceship near Earth was transmitting them, and the signal was in fact an invitation to their system, transmitted for the past 12,600 years. Okay. And then there are photos I showed you. So they gather all this information, and it seems that a bunch of independent pieces of evidence points to the existence of something extraterrestrial in orbit. The 12,000 years comes from the Lunan's article, as well as the connection to Izar system. Photos from STS-88 mission confirm the existence of the object, and the fact that those photos were deleted proves that NASA wants to hide the truth. It's quite remarkable how everything seems to converge into one point. Maybe there's really something flying around. Can you imagine, or perhaps you might even know some people to whom you could tell everything I've just listed, and they would at least entertain the idea that it could be true, or at least that there is something fishy is going on? I definitely can, and there are plenty of people like that on the internet. But if we were to dissect each argument more thoroughly and see if they actually confirm anything or happened at all, well, let's do just that, and start in the same order, beginning with Tesla. For a skeptic, it is easy to think that the whole story with Tesla receiving signals from space and thinking that they were from aliens would be made up from start to finish. Not all quotes of famous people that you can find on the internet are real, you know. But here, it is not the case. As far as we can tell, it is pretty much what happened. In the summer of 1899, during his experiments in Colorado Springs, Nikola Tesla captured strange signals using a low-frequency receiver. The peculiarity of those signals was that they had a certain rhythm and also they repeated. It's not unusual for astronomers to detect some strange signal which seems to have an artificial origin. And sometimes, as one of the explanations, alien artificial origin is considered. However, usually the media likes to focus on that version, while for scientists it's always the last one. considered only in case all known natural causes fail to explain the signal. Tesla believed that the known possible sources of such a signal could not explain it, and he allowed for the possibility that the signal might be coming from space. Natural space causes such as solar activity or auroras were also ruled out by him. By the way, he also speculated that life might exist somewhere else in the solar system, on Mars, on Venus, or somewhere else, and that it's possible to try to establish communication with them. Well, he also entertained the idea that these strange signals could be transmitted by intelligent aliens, perhaps Martians. You might ask what a supposed spy satellite of aliens orbiting Earth have to do with all this? Well, nothing. Tesla never spoke or wrote about any satellites. It's modern theorists who just took Tesla's discovery and connected it to the Black Knight story. Probably not least of all to make the story sound more impressive or believable by associating with a prominent name like Nikola Tesla. But what did Tesla find back then? Well, it's hard to say now for sure. But considering how many signals we found later with much more advanced equipment and that almost always there is a rational explanation, it's most definitely not aliens. There's a theory that he intercepted a signal from a pulsar decades before their discovery. It is possible, but there's also an option that his equipment might not have been capable of that. Another idea is that Tesla intercepted signals that Guglielmo Marconi was sending during his radio experiments at that time. In the end, it could have simply been some interference, especially since Tesla didn't attempt to capture the signal again, and it's unclear whether it repeated further, as would be the case, for example, with the pulsar. Then Tesla returned to New York, and as he wrote, he became completely absorbed in other matters, and he no longer had time for the signal, although he continued to think about it. So in summary, Tesla did indeed pick up some signal, and he did speculate that it might come from aliens. However, he picked up the signal only once, and most likely it was some sort of interference. And most importantly, the story with Tesla has nothing to do with the Black Knight. The next argument is long delayed echoes, LDEs, which were first discovered by Jürgen Holz in 1927. On his receiver, he was receiving signals from a short-wave transmitter. In addition to primary telegraph signals, he also received echoes of those signals, and those regular echoes were already known. Those that don't come directly from the transmitter but manage to travel around the Earth and come with a slight delay of a fraction of a second. After all, radio signals travel at the speed of light, and that's how long it takes to them to travel around the Earth. A signal can circle the Earth, for example, by multiple reflections from the ionosphere and the Earth's surface, or with the help of what's known as atmospheric waveguide. But in addition to the main signal and a regular echo, he also received another echo that came with a longer delay of about 3 seconds. And this signal was much weaker than the regular echo, and it wasn't clear where the signal bounced around for 3 seconds. During this time, it could have traveled to the moon and back. But Holz didn't even attempt to provide any explanations. He simply wrote that he didn't know what that was. Later, LDEs were recorded multiple times by different people in various conditions. Interestingly, the delay time could vary significantly, from several seconds to tens of seconds. As I mentioned before, we still don't know for sure the nature of LDEs. However, there are several theories, and all of them are related to either Earth or objects beyond Earth. The signal can pass through the ionosphere in a certain way and can go along magnetic lines. This way, it can cover a much greater distance. Also, the signal can circle around the Earth multiple times. There have been cases where people registered their own signal sent towards the horizon from the opposite direction 9 seconds later. This means that the signal could have done dozens of loops around the planet. There are also processes where a radio wave can interact with the plasma in the ionosphere, generating a wave similar to acoustic waves, oscillations in the plasma. These oscillations are then converted back into radiation, which can also cause delays. You might have thought that signals could be reflected off of different celestial bodies, like moon or planets, and that could explain varying delay times. If the signal reflects off the moon, there would be a delay of about 3 seconds. But if it reflects off a planet, it would be much longer. Moreover, we're now quite capable of both reflecting and registering reflected signals from planets. For example, from Venus. But the problem here is that the returning signals from planets would take many minutes, whereas our typical delay is at most around 40 seconds. Another potential candidate for signal reflection beyond Earth is ionized gas or plasma clouds that could reflect radio signals. They could be located at L4 and L5 Lagrange point of the Earth-Moon system, or at the L1 point of the Sun-Earth system, where variations in delay from 2.5 to 10 seconds are also possible. Here the problem is that the frequency of the signal should shift due to the Doppler effect, considering the relative motion, but this shift is not observed. In general, there is a whole range of natural explanations, but they have their own problems, so this mystery remains unsolved. Many of these hypotheses are also not easy to verify. But there's one more candidate: aliens. And here begins the story with Duncan Lunan. There are actually more steps involved and more people engaged, but the main point is that Duncan analyzed the signals of long-delayed echoes from 1920s and saw that all those echoes were not just random events, but they contained a coded message. He made a graph where he plotted the echo and delay times as points, and he seemingly obtained an image resembling the constellation of Boötes, or rather what it looked like 12,600 years ago. Hence the reference to the Izar system and the idea that the ship arrived 12,600 years ago. However, Duncan Lunan himself later stated that the records he used were not accurate and he misinterpreted them. So, in short, he admitted the mistake. He didn't write about the Black Knight. Also, on his website he stated that the media attributed to him things that he didn't say. And he emphasizes, quote, "I'm not a professional astronomer, I'm not a radio amateur, I'm not a professor," and so on. He has a whole paragraph in the article stating, "The Black Knight, nothing to do with me." But his findings remain one of the main elements of the Black Knight legend. And that's not all. As for the newspaper reports from 1954 and the alleged confirmation by the US Air Force, newspapers talking about aliens. Unprecedented. Surely that must be true. A very strong argument. But to be serious, reports about 2 satellites in Earth's orbit were published in 2 newspapers, St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the Francisco Examiner. And as I mentioned, this happened even before the first launch of the first artificial satellite into space. The entire story and the connection to the US Air Force stems from only 2 individuals. The newspapers picked up and published a story about satellites after a statement of Donald Kehoe, a former pilot. He's also a writer, and in the 1950s he released several books about how flying saucers are real. And one of the books was released right when these articles came out. It seems like a good way to promote the book by spreading such rumors. Regarding the confirmation by the US Air Force, again, according to Kehoe's words, US Air Force Secretary Harold Talbot was aware of those satellites in orbit and even saw some silvery disk in the sky. Wow, the Secretary of Air Force, but Talbot himself denied it. So that's that. Not much of an argument either. But just a few years later there was another story about satellites, but of a different nature. Here the objects were not a complete fabrication by a writer who was probably trying to sell his book. In the 1960s, newspapers reported on a mysterious dark object in almost a polar orbit around Earth, and the Black Knight is supposedly in a polar orbit. Neither the Soviet Union nor the United States acknowledged that it was their spacecraft. But this time the object actually existed. Ground-based systems tracked it, and 3 weeks later, an article in the Time magazine reported that the object had been identified as the remnants of the Discoverer 8 satellite, which was placed into an eccentric orbit, but there were some failures, like the cameras didn't work and the parachute on the return capsule failed to deploy. The catch here is that after some documents were declassified, it turned out that the Discoverer program, which was presented as a scientific research mission, was actually a cover for a spy mission called Corona. The satellites were placed into a polar orbit because it allowed them to capture much more of the Earth's surface than from an equatorial orbit. At the time, images were taken using film, and the film had to be brought back to Earth. As a result, the remaining parts of the satellite burned up in the atmosphere. Here are the declassified CIA documents about the Corona program, and they mention that very Discoverer 8. While this object wasn't what it was initially claimed to be, it certainly wasn't an alien satellite, so once again, off the mark. They also used statements from astronaut Gordon Cooper, claiming he saw the Black Knight and also some green lights, while in space during the Mercury 9 mission. It's a very clever move by conspiracy theorists. Firstly, just like with Tesla, they use a well-known name. Plus, an astronaut who actually had been to space, and not just any astronaut, but the one who has indeed claimed to have seen unidentified flying objects. But the story that he supposedly saw something specifically during the Mercury 9 mission is completely fabricated. Not only did Gordon Cooper deny this, but he also provided transcripts of the flight conversations, and there is nothing like that mentioned there. And now we need to deal with the photographs that I started the video with. The first issue is, let's assume it's really that mysterious satellite. Then, it would be problematic for the shuttle crew to casually photograph it, especially multiple times. The ISS is not on a polar orbit, but on an inclined equatorial one, while the Black Knight satellite is presumed to be on a polar orbit. They couldn't synchronize orbits to move slowly enough relative to each other. It would have been a very lucky coincidence for the objects to intersect at the moment when people were there, and even if it did happen, they would have passed by each other at a high speed. But there is no need to assume anything, because we know perfectly well what object in the images is. In 1998, Space Shuttle Endeavour embarked on STS-88 mission. The crew consisted of 6 people, including Russian cosmonaut Sergei Krikalev, who took those very photos. By that time, the first module of the ISS, Zarya, was already in orbit, and the cargo bay of the shuttle contained the American Unity module, along with several other satellites. However, the main task was to attach the second module to the ISS. By that time, the first module of the ISS was already in the orbit. Unity was successfully attached. During transportation on the shuttle, the Unity module was secured by 4 connecting bolts. Here they are in the photos. After docking, they remain protruding from the module, and since they are bare metal pieces, it's not very good because heat can escape into space through them. Therefore, after docking, a spacewalk was conducted, during which the 4 bolts needed to be covered with special thermal insulation blankets. In this image you can see one bolt already covered with the insulation blanket, while here one is still not covered. Well, one blanket accidentally got lost and it flew off into space. And that's what they photographed. This darn thing is your Black Knight, the alien spaceship. It's actually even captured on video. During the spacewalk, several covers were held by Jerry Ross. The covers were attached to him by tethers, and in the video you can see how they are dangling quite freely. In the transcripts of crew's conversations, Commander Robert Cabana tells Ross that one of the blankets is flying away from him, and Ross confirms that he lost it, although he doesn't know how it happened. In short, it came loose and was carried away. The actual moment of loss isn't captured in the video I found, but there are frames showing the thermal blanket slowly drifting away. Here are those frames. Here is a view from another angle. When the loss became known, the crew aboard the shuttle attempted to film the drifting blanket. That's also on video. Here is Sergei Krikalev with the camera filming that. And there is even a video from the shuttle's onboard camera showing the drifting cover. I'll leave links to the full videos in the description, as well as to the hour-long video with lots of footage of the spacewalk from that mission. Looking at just this one photograph, indeed one might think it's some strange extraterrestrial object. That even inspired an artist to create this cool artwork based on the photograph. But there are other frames as well. Here I'm showing all 6 of them in sequence, and if you align the first 4 with the Earth, you can even make the animation where the rotation of the object is visible. By the way, this is what blankets like that look on better quality images, only here they are of a different shape. And here we can see a blanket of the required shape. One side is rounded, while the opposite side has straight angles, and several elements protrude from one side. Here the shape is quite visible too, and you can see that these elements in the photo match up. Now compare this still frame from the shuttle's video with one of the infamous photographs. As is usual with the large fragments in space, the object was assigned a number, 025570. Additionally, the NASA's report mentions 3 objects released during this spacewalk. 2 objects were released intentionally, 2 antenna spools, with one being ejected here, and 1 object that was released accidentally, the thermal insulation blanket. A couple of days later, the object disappeared, most likely burning up in the atmosphere. Statements about NASA's hiding things because the photos disappeared from the website, well, it's simple. The website was being redesigned, and then the photos reappeared. It is interesting that none of the people mentioned in this story referred to the object as the Black Knight. It's not clear where the name came from. In the 60s, the British had a ballistic missile with that name, but it has no relation to this story, just like everything else here. Someone, based on some general science like the satellite in orbit and that the orbit is polar, or that the word dark was mentioned in the news, gathered a bunch of unconnected stories, some of which were even made up, while others were heavily distorted. And that still doesn't stop people from making videos about how the Black Knight was shot down by the Illuminati, or even crazier stories. There was a Mayan ruler, Pakal. On the stone lid of his tomb, there is a drawing. And there are people who see in this drawing a person sitting inside a spacecraft. They claim that ancient Maya traveled to space or were influenced by aliens. So there are videos on YouTube where they compare the photo of the Black Knight with this drawing. I would hope they're just trolling, but in summary, if it wasn't clear right away, there is definitely no alien space satellite in Earth's orbit. But it is still interesting how even from such unrelated, made-up or exaggerated arguments, a somewhat popular conspiracy theory can emerge. It appears it doesn't take a lot to convince people prone to believe in such things, but debunking each argument usually takes much more time and effort. Thanks for watching. Links to all of the sources are as usual down below in the description, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment and subscribe for more videos in future. And feel free to share it with your friends and family and everybody else. Okay, bye!